So hello again. My name is Lieutenant Sharlagi. I'm with the California Advanced Hunter Education Program, and we are here tonight to help you learn about D3, 4, and 5 deer zones and help you be more successful and have more knowledge in those areas. Our Advanced Hunter Education Program isn't really advanced. It's just to give you the how-tos of hunting and give you the little tips and success stories to help you be a better hunter, safer hunter out in the field. If you've already taken our basic hunter education and become a hunter, these classes will just help you to, experience a little bit better time out there in the field. Please feel free to, in the future, look at any recorded webinars or contact me with any content that you may want to see in the future. I'm always open to hearing what your suggestions are as far as future webinars, and please present them to me. I'm out there. I'm here to help you become a safer, better, more confident hunter. The next announcement is that September 8th, and this will be at the end also, September 8th will be our next webinar. It'll be on choosing the right rifle ammunition. That'll be really good for you because it'll help you in determining the right bullet for your rifle. The new copper ammunition that we use is a little bit longer if you want to try and use the same grain weight bullet as you normally do, and your rifle that you currently have may not shoot that properly. So we're going to talk about those things, but tonight we're going to address the D3 through 5, and I'm going to go ahead and start with a poll, and I'm going to make sure the panelists can participate. And I'm launching it. So here's the poll. Have you ever hunted deer in zones D3 through 5? Yes or no? Number 2, have you ever had any success bagging a deer or bear in D3 through 5? It's multiple choice. So you can either put no, yes for deer only, yes bear only, or yes bear and deer. We want to see how you've done there. And unfortunately, I didn't come up with any jokes tonight. If you're used to watching us, you're used to my sorry dad jokes that sometimes are funny and sometimes are really bombers. So no jokes tonight, sorry. All right, I'm gonna let this poll go for about 3 more seconds. See a lot of people participating. I'm very happy with that. And we go 3, 2, 1, and end the poll. I'm going to share the results with you so you can see them yourselves. So I'm going to read this because it's not recorded in the webinar. Have you ever hunted deer in zones D3 through 5? 74% of you said yes. Okay, and when it comes to success, I asked if any of you had bagged any deer or bear. 70% of you said no. 23% said deer only. 2% said bear only, and 5% said bear and deer. All right, ladies, so there's some of our experience there in the crowd. You can see that. All right, stop sharing. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we'll keep moving along here. Just a second. You'd think I've done this before and be really quick at it, but sometimes I'm not. All right. Share screen. And here it goes. Should be up right now. All right, so here's our topic, and here's the general area of what we're talking about, which starts way up here up Highway 70 is the northern border up here. On the south, it comes down to the, what is it, the Tuolumne River or the Stanislaus? It's somewhere down this way. I think it's Tuolumne, right? Is that what it is, Shelley? Tuolumne? Yeah, yeah. And the 99 corridor. All right. So it's a big area. It's over 6 million acres in whole. I know that's not all huntable, but it is definitely something that has some deer in it. You'll just say, where? I haven't seen them. All right. So our talking points for tonight, we're going to talk about zone herd health, deer staging areas, as far as, you know, where they are at normally and what their migration routes are. We have some really good slides on collared deer movement, factors for hunter success, the effects of recent fires. You know, last year we had the big Caldor fire, which, you know, seemed big as far as total acreage, but it might not have been as devastating as some might think. We'll talk about zone accessibility, like where can you hunt this year? Some of the private lands, we'll talk about that. They're actually closed. The, you know, SPI lands that people, the lumber company that used to really help and let hunters go out there, some of their lands are closed, maybe not, if not all of them. We'll talk about some special hunt opportunities and other hunt opportunities for bear, grouse, squirrel, and quail. So, you know, we'll touch on some of those. If you have specific questions, make sure you ask them. As far as the D3, 4, and 5 tag allocation, they have 33,000 tags available every year in those zones. A lot of you may get them as a second choice. You know, when you try to put in for a nice premium hunt and you're unsuccessful, a lot of you end up with this tag. There's not too many people that put it as their first choice, but it's not a bad second choice. There's usually tags available and you have an opportunity to go deer hunting. As of earlier today, there was still over 4,000 tags still available. The archery season opened last Saturday and it goes through 9/11. And then there's a couple weeks off before it comes back and starts on September 24th and runs through October 30th. The bear seasons coincide with those. Archery season coincides with the archery deer season. And the general bear season will start up when the general season opens and extend to Christmas Day, unless there's been 1,700 bears taken before then, which has not happened since hound dogs were made illegal to use for bear hunting. So please get a bear tag. You will see bears most likely in these areas. And I don't know what happens, but whenever I buy a bear tag, I don't see them as often as when I do have one. So maybe your luck will change. Maybe the bear retardant on that bear tag will wear off. All right, one more slide, I think. So tonight we are joined by the 3 S's as they're known, the super supportive scientists. That's what I call them. Actually, their first names all start with S. So we have Stacy, Sarah, and Shelly joining us tonight. They're going to be very helpful, very informative, and they're going to help you be better deer hunters and get to know these areas better. So first off, we have Stacy Anderson. She's a biologist, unit biologist for the Plumas and Sierra counties since 2019, and she has been with our department since for 15 years. And there she is, capping a nice buck deer there, not afraid to get her hands too dirty, but at work. That's great.
That's the old style CWD collection there.
Okay. And then we have Sarah Holm. She's also a wildlife biologist, unit biologist in Placer and Nevada counties. She's been with our department for 23 years. She's also a volunteer hunter education instructor. Go Sarah. And she says, I love that my job is different every day based on what comes up. I always wanted to work outside and to be around wildlife out in the forest with people who enjoy the same things I do. I spend all summer hunting deer to put collars on them. What could be better? She probably has more time behind looking for deer than a lot of us. So great, I'm jealous. Good job, Sarah. And our last presenter tonight will be Shelly Blair. She's also a unit biologist for El Dorado and Alpine counties. She has worked for CDFW for 18 years and has been in her current position for 11 and a half. And she grew up, she has a love for the work for natural resources in the community that she grew up in and lives in. And that every once in a while, she has a privilege of unlocking the mysteries of nature and get hands on wild critters. As you can see here, she's caught some probably backyard buck that got stuck in a clothesline. My colleagues and all the other unit bios in R2 are the most incredible scientists and fun people I know, and she learns from them every day. So welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us tonight. Look forward to proceeding in this webinar. And we're going to go ahead and start with you, Stacy. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, I'll stop sharing mine. And remember, if you have any questions, put them in the question answer function, and we'll try to address them appropriately. Okay, thank you.
Okay, am I sharing?
You are sharing, thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to preface this by saying I'm terrible at speaking to the public. It's somewhat better tonight, not being able to see any faces, but I definitely encourage any of the D3 hunters, and especially in Plumas and Sierra County, to reach out to me. I have my contact information at the end of my presentation so that I can help you with any questions that we're not able to answer tonight through our comment box. So tonight I'll be talking about the D3 deer hunt zone within the Plumas, Sierra, Butte, and Yuba County borders. I'm going to stay away from the extreme west side in the valley, and then my colleague Sarah will be talking about the counties to the south, which is Nevada County, for the D3 zone. So, make sure I know how to change my slide here. Okay, so the overview of my talk is going to be general information, followed by talking about 3 of our northern D3 zone herds. Then I'll talk a little bit about fire impact, some stuff of special interest that I think might be helpful, and then also talk about some of the other species you might want to consider while out hunting. So to get started with our general information, I'll probably be about 10 minutes, so I'll try not to talk too fast, but some of the information I won't be able to get into great detail. Like I said, I encourage you to follow up in the Q&A or via email. So for D3, all season information, zone maps, information on special hunts, regulations. Oh shoot, I already screwed up. Hold on, I gotta get this little box out of my way. Regulations, harvest information, any fire closures, our excellent guide to hunting deer in California, license guide lookup, our hunting digest, and all of our deer management and biology information can be located online, and I've provided the link here, but it's also pretty Googleable. And then our region, Region 2, which extends from Plumas County down to Calaveras County, so the D3 zones, do have some spot kill maps available for a certain number of years, and those are located at the link right below the hunting deer. So the D3 zone, general information, the D zones are shown in blue. That's encompasses the deer conservation unit, which we call the Central Sierra, and they're all managed pretty similarly, and they have a similar habitat. So you have valley floor going all the way upslope to the ridge line of the Sierra. And let me go ahead, and our zone that we'll be talking about is going to be the top of that Central Sierra zone. And the zone map here is coming up, and I will be talking about the deer herd areas that are located, oops, went too far, in that northern portion of the D3 zone. So like I said, we're gonna not focus on the western side or that southern side of the zone. So just to give you a little brief overview of some of our D3 tag and harvest information. I put up the last few years of our quotas, tags issued, take, and then of course we have to up that with estimated take to account for unreported deer take, and then also success. All of this is available on our hunting digest if you're able to get a hold of that and read it. But the last few years have been pretty consistent. I would just point out that in 2020, we see a lower success and a lower reported take, and I would account that for the North Complex fire, because we had fewer hunters that were able to access the area. We had zone closures from and Forest Service land was closed from part of that zone from August to October of that year, which basically wiped out the season there. We've been pretty consistently almost selling out the D3 through 5 tag, and our success rates are pretty consistent, pretty consistently at 10%. And if you have any kind of follow-up questions or want to get more information on that, just let us know. For land access and maps in the D3 zone that I'm talking about, it will be mostly made up of the Plumas National Forest and the Tahoe National Forest. Note that there are fire restrictions in place in both of these forests, especially if you're not camping at a campground with a camp host. I encourage you to reach out to them with any questions individually because they'll have the most up-to-date information. There's also quite a bit of private timberland in the D3 through 5, especially as you're moving west into more intermediate areas. And those consist of our Sierra Pacific Industries and the Soper Company. The Sierra Pacific has already released a statement saying they're going to be closed to the public in 2022. Soper Company, I tried to reach out to and have not gotten any answers yet, but I think that some of our law enforcement might be able to let you know some of the information on what kind of signage and gate would indicate that you would not be able to go on those lands. I also recommend USGS topographic maps and obtaining Forest Service maps. You can get these via paper, or if you are doing a Venza or any kind of an iPad viewer or use your phone, you can get those online as well. And then I also recommend the Onyx Hunt Map, and you can use that to get private versus public land information. So that's really useful. And you can get those on an app through your phone, or if you have a GPS unit, you can buy a chip to install, which is pretty useful. Okay. And then as far as population information for this zone, like I mentioned before, all of that information is available on our website. Those numbers are pretty old, and I wouldn't say that the field biologists necessarily agree with some of those numbers. Instead, we've spent a lot of our energy in updating our monitoring plan for the Central Sierra Deer Conservation Unit, which includes deer zones D3 through 7. And this calls for an integrated population model, which would be a lot more realistic. And so in the next few years, we're going to be using tools such as fecal DNA-based capture-recapture surveys in order to get information like abundance and sex ratios. We'll also be utilizing camera trapping and GPS collars in order to get the better population numbers that we all want. And that's kind of all I have to say about that. So moving on to the northern D3 zone herds. We'll start with the herd orientation here. So here's a map showing kind of all of our herds in that Central Sierra DCU. Let's see, I think I've got some fancy arrows here. So we'll first start off with our Sloat herd, and then move down to our Bucks Mountain herd, and then Moortown herd, located right here near the top. So starting off with the Sloat herd, because the Sloat herd is in a couple of different deer hunt zones, I went ahead and highlighted in yellow the portion of the Sloat herd that is actually in our D3 through 5 zone. It's in the upper northeastern portion of that D3 zone, and it is mostly in Plumas County, with just a small portion of that in Sierra County in the Gold Lakes area. And the deer in this zone are Columbian black-tailed deer with some hybrid potential with mule deer. And so you'll see a lot of variation on the tail colors in this area. We've got mixed conifer habitat for the most part, and a lot of this area is made up of summer range for our migratory deer herd. We do have increasingly residential herds, especially in the Quincy area. We're seeing that the deer kind of, especially with these mild winters we've been having lately, don't seem to be leaving town and hanging out, especially in that American Valley near and about Quincy. This area has really good public access and consists of Plumas and Tahoe National Forest. I made kind of a red X down at the bottom of that map there, and that is our Plumas Eureka State Park, and there is no hunting allowed in this state park. So that would be the one spot you would need to look out for besides private land. Seasonal migration from this area is going to be west and moves down slope. A lot of this area that you see here, as I mentioned, is summer range. So threats to this herd include highway roadkill. We have Highway 70, Highway 89 that comes straight through this area. And so it's a really big spot for hitting deer. We also have plenty of bears up in Plumas County. So we have bears, coyotes on our fawns. And then we also have not a huge population of lions like in the foothills, but still a good portion of lions as well. And then of course, we've had recent bouts of adenovirus in the recent years, which take their toll as well. Moving on to the Bucks Mountain herd, also in D3. This is located in the north central portion of the D3 zone and encompasses western Plumas and eastern Butte counties. It's approximately 700 square miles. And this area has mostly Columbian black-tailed deer. You won't see very many hybrids over on this side. They are also migratory, and nearly all of the summer range is going to be within the Plumas National Forest, which has really good access. As you move west, the intermediate and winter range is going to be mostly privately owned. You'll see those timber companies that I mentioned before, and then also just a lot of other private landowners as well that probably are going to be hard to get access points for. So starting from the east side, you'll have mixed conifer habitat, and then as you're moving down the slope, you'll hit the hardwoods and then get into the oak woodland areas. And that's going to contain the intermediate and then the summer ranges. And as you move more and more west, you're going to hit those residential populations as well. See here. So threats here also include highway roadkill. We have poaching and predators, all the usual suspects, but we also have a lot of feral or domestic dogs that are loose that probably have quite an impact on our fawn populations as well. So Moortown is just south of that Bucks Mountain herd that we just talked about, and it encompasses Plumas County, the western portion, as well as the eastern portions of Butte and Yuba County, and just a small portion of Sierra County. It's also approximately 700 square miles and consists of Columbian black-tailed deer, migratory, especially on the west-hand side, the east side, and that portion is going to be mostly covered by the Plumas National Forest. Intermediate and winter range on the western portion of this herd zone are mostly private owned. A lot of the same issues, like I said, as the Bucks Mountain zone. So a lot of times these herds are managed pretty closely together. And we'll move down to fire impact. So the biggest fire impact we've had in recent years, especially since I've been working in this area, was our North Complex fire. That occurred in 2020, and it was approximately 320,000 acres. It's the 6th largest and 5th most destructive wildfire in California, at least to date. It was a lightning-caused fire, and in fact, hundreds of fires were sparked by one dry lightning siege, which took place in mid-August. And so what you can see here is in this red, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but in this red zone down over here, this is going to be that North Complex fire. And you can see the extent of it is really great. And it burned roughly from Oroville in the west to Quincy in the east. So I made this map here to kind of show the footprint a little bit within the zone. So you can see that it takes up a really good portion of the zone, especially the east side. But you know, a lot of that east side is where you have all the good hunting access. Good news is that just because the perimeter of the fire is shown on this map doesn't mean that every square acre of that polygon was burned. So you have a mix of severe, moderate, light, and actually unburned in that 320,000 acres. So it's not all doom and gloom. And as we move into the next slide, the impact of wildfire on herds, especially in conifer, it is not as terrible as you would think. 20th century habitat management has moved towards increasingly mature and low diversity forest, which actually drops the quality of deer forage, drops the quality of habitat, and has resulted in lower densities of deer. So wildfire, if not severe, can actually positively impact our deer numbers by replacing those old decadent shrubs with new growth, which is much more nutritious. It doesn't have the tannins that are not good for deer. And then we also have much more open space, more new growth can occur. So, and then of special interest. So I wanted to put this up here, which kind of shows some of our collar data from recent years. And these are some of the migration routes of our C4 and D3 collared deer. So you can kind of see that western movement, and they typically follow ridge lines down the west side. Just kind of wanted to share that with you all. I believe I don't know if we'll be publishing this, but we will have reports, and if you guys are interested in this kind of information, you can reach out.
Stacy, what's the timeline for these migrations? Like, what time period were they recorded during?
Oh, you mean what years?
Well, no, is this like a multi-year, or is it like, one summer, starting on the east side and moving west towards the
Sure.
winter?
So they're max of 2 years. It depends. Each color is a different individual. So you can see in some of them, you only have one path that you can tell. And in other ones, maybe you see 2 paths. And that's really all dependent on how the collar functioned. We have a lot of issues with how heavy of a battery we could put on the deer. So sometimes those batteries just don't last as long as we would want them to. And with migration collars, we really want to get as many points as possible, because in California, we don't have huge long migrations. And if we only have the collars collecting 1 point a day, well, if they migrate in a day, we only get 1 point. So we really have to ramp up how many points we're taking, and that takes a lot of battery. So sometimes we'll only get a year out of them. Hopefully 2 years is, I think, the hope for a migration collar.
Well, I don't mean to give you all the good questions. There's a couple of good ones that have come in. So, and we're talking about migration a little bit right now. When do the migrations typically take place is one question. And when you're talking about migrating deer, do they typically stay within the region you are describing, or is the migration basically based on an elevation change?
Sure. So the herd boundaries are based on the migration. So we try to keep, the deers that are migrating, that they're actually going to stay within that deer herd zone. And so, like I was mentioning about the herds I was talking about, those are moving east to west, and that would encompass, if I talked about the Bucks Mountain herd, it's going to travel east to west, we think, down in that line. A lot of that data, when those herds were established, though, they didn't have GPS collars, right? They had other methods of tagging deer and then following them. So, maybe not as accurate as we can get these days. So we're always looking to revise how we do deer management. And that's kind of why we've moved away from herd management and have moved more towards these DCUs, which was the Deer Conservation Unit that I spoke of, because the deer are not always staying within their herd boundaries that were established 4 or 5 decades ago. So, and then as far as timing, a lot of the timing is really dependent on vegetation and weather. So things like temperature, weather events, availability of forage, maybe wanting to get away from predators would all probably drive the deer to start moving. And then I'm not going to share too much more, because I know that Shelley is going to be talking a lot about this, and I want to make sure there's lots of time for her project information, because there's some great stuff. And then, moving on to tips, migration. So when you're thinking about hunting on the summer range, just be aware, migration might be prompted by low nighttime temps and storms, things like that. So if you are on the summer range, just be aware if it's a really freak cold year, the deer might have already moved on. And then weather events are actually going to be the biggest driver of deer movement during the day. And, they're probably the biggest factor in opening weekend success is it's correlated with weather. So scouting would also be my biggest tip. Scouting, especially if you're going to be in a fire area when you haven't been up there, really important to see what the area looks like to determine your access. And then also look for those good feeding, bedding areas and your deer trails. So, pay special attention to the forage quality in an area. And I think that's all I'll say about that. And people want to ask questions, we can answer those. And then as far as other species, consider buying a bear tag. So we have a lot of reduced habitat availability and forage immediately after the fire before those shrubs move in. So we do have quite a few bears, especially in that fire footprint. And Plumas County, especially if you head towards the eastern side of this zone, I mean, the bear sign is incredible. So I think it would be a really great place, especially for a novice bear hunter. And feel free to contact me with any questions or specifics about that.
All right.
And here's my contact information here. Gorgeous picture of the Sierra Buttes. And I just want to say, hunting in the gorgeous Gold Lakes area, this is the view you're going to have right here. And that was taken in the fall during the deer season. I don't know how you can get any better than that, honestly.
All right. Thank you, Stacy.
Take care.
Looks like Sarah's ready to go. Sarah, you can go ahead and take over the screen share.
All right, I am sharing. Get this up and hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I am happy to be here. Glad to see a lot of you guys participating. Shelly and I teach our Hunter Ed instructor class together, and we always start by thanking everyone for being a hunter. Your conservation dollars are what makes this work happen and really contributes to what we get to do. A lot of other non-hunters don't realize that. They not everyone thinks that hunting is great, but we do, and we appreciate you. So thanks for being here. I'm going to pick up where Stacy left off with the D3 zone, and looking at it on topo here. I'm going to focus in on the two remaining migratory herds that we have here, the Downeyville and the Nevada City herd. Can see what she just talked about, Sloat, Bucks Mountain, and Moortown to the north. And I'm going to ignore also that western portion where most of you will not get to hunt unless you have access to private lands. So these are migratory blacktail as well, occasionally mule deer and hybrids. Up where this zone borders with X7A, we have had collar data from the mule deer show that they'll come over the crest of the Sierra to the west side. The blacktails don't tend to do that, so it does give you a chance with your D3 tag to harvest a mule deer. They have crossed down to Fordyce Lake and also crossed 80 within the D3 zone and gone south of 80 just below Soda Springs. The Downeyville herd here is 723 miles square approximately, in Nevada City 466 of those 6 million acres that Sean mentioned in the beginning. This resident population is the mother Lode herd. Shelly will talk a little bit about that. We've got borders here with I-80, with D3 and D4, sorry, the A zone, X6A, X7A. So you want to make sure that you know where you're hunting, especially when it comes into those zones that your tag does not work for. Of course, you're able to go from D3 and 4 and 5 with the tag that you have. So I'm going to mention population also. It's a very complicated process from the 1989 deer herd management plan update that happened last with this herd. The population for that Nevada City herd was around 2,545 animals. We had 153 bucks harvested that year. In Downeyville, 2,412 with 145 bucks harvested. I've got this table that you can pull off the internet down here in the bottom that shows what the population estimates have been for these D zones in the last 5 years. You can see a decline, but you also see large numbers. This probably is encompassing the resident deer herds in that mother Lode herd, which really are densely populated and unrealistic. So like Stacy said, we do have some concerns with giving you these numbers. The last column here is the fecal DNA work that we're trying to do. These D zones are so thick and dense that you really cannot survey them as well as we would like to. We fly surveys in helicopter on the X zone so we can get our comp counts and get some other information that we need to make these analyses. But all these numbers are extrapolated from some level of information that includes buck harvest. And basically what you need to do with deer herds is make sure that you're not harvesting more bucks than can basically breed with the remaining, the does in the population. So the buck doe ratios are a part of that. Again, not something that we have a tight grip on, but we can say that these herds are declining, that they're probably not ever going to climb back up to those historically high populations. The summer range in this area of D3 is basically 4,500 to 6,500 feet in elevation. This basically starts where you hit the Forest Service lines as you go up. And then winter range is considered lower than 2,500 feet in elevation. This has changed a little bit, but we recommend, hunting in that high elevation area. There are bucks, I call them the hardier animals, that go up to the Pacific Crest Trail, the crest of the Sierra. And usually there's fewer of them up there, but they are up there. So that kind of spreads out where you can hunt. This part of D3 is all Tahoe National Forest. There's no wilderness here, no refuges, but there is SPI, and Stacy talked about the closure for this year due to fire risk. We'll see what happens. They usually post that pretty well. And we also have several other special hunts in this area, including 3 either sex hunts for juniors. Access is pretty good through here. I've scribbled some lines over some of the highways. So from, well, Auburn down here, 49 goes up and then across the zone. We've got I-80 that you can use to get into some of these areas from Grass Valley. Highway 20 will take you all the way back out to 80. So if you've never been to these areas, these are just some of the places of entry. Also up in Truckee, you can take 89 and come in to Jackson Meadows, and they all connect. Lots of Forest Service roads. These two here are going into Fordyce Lake. You can also access from the Pacific Crest Trail. And again, especially with this border with 7A, you want to make sure you have good mapping available so you know where you're hunting, so you're legal. Forest Service maps, GPS, all of that is still good to get you around here. And a little bit more about the habitat here, again, similar with what Stacy talked about and what Shelley will talk about. These are some of the species, the Ceanothus, that deer like to eat, species that you can look for if you're scouting and looking for things that they might forage on. And we're getting past the forbs and grasses stage, but the currants and bitter cherries and the buckbrushes are still available. We do have oaks in this area, so acorns as well. These two herds have not experienced big fires lately. That just means that they are ready to burn, unfortunately. It is likely to happen, and it will, be good for these areas that are just really dense. Some threats here are similar: habitat loss and conversion, this dense forest that doesn't allow light to get to the bottom of the forest floor and regrow new plants. You have dense fields of brush that get older and just less nutritious for these animals, and so it's not as good for them. We do have poaching. You can see this, one of my collared animals was poached just after being collared and out of season, and a doe. So there's some of that going on. We have animal vehicle collisions here because these animals interact with 20 and 49 and 89. There is roadkill. We are addressing that with some of our connectivity work within the department and within the state. Finally, we've got 2 underpasses being built right now on Highway 20 that'll move some of these animals that we used roadkill data and collar data to show where they were trying to cross and weren't successful. And again, disease, not a lot in the migratory population, but they do bump into resident deer that tend to be more likely to succumb to disease. And, all of these things, running from predators or not having good nutritional forage, it just adds to the body condition, the overall health. When it's not good, you're not recruiting fawns into the population. And so that's part of what keeps your numbers from being able to recuperate. So this also from the long ago herd plan, just showing that we have the summer range on the east end and the higher elevations, and they're moving generally east to west down to the winter range in the west area. More or less, this still is what's occurring now, which we've verified with current callers. This is interesting to me because these black-tailed deer do kind of an opposite migration from the mule deer that are just adjacent to them. These guys are moving west for winter, whereas the mule deer are moving east for winter. So they kind of go in opposite directions as you hit the Sierra, the crest of the Sierra. So we got a little bit of look at some of the collar data. We put these collars on so we can see these migration routes, so we can see home range and use that information for population. It helps us with the connectivity work if they're crossing highways, also land acquisition to make sure we protect the corridors. And there's a big push in the West right now with lots of different groups that are trying to make sure that these migration corridors stay around for these deer. So each color, again, a different deer. We've only got a handful here that moved. You can see this orange bunch was collared in the summer. This is actually the doe that was poached, so she did not get to make a migration. But they're moving. I'm going to pull up some of the features here, the linear features that deer tend to move along. So we've got the north, middle, and south fork of the Yuba River. The Bear River is down here. There's also coming out of Spalding a lot of canals that they tend to go to not only for water, but to move along. Some of the things, Jackson Meadows Lake up here, Reservoir, Bowman Lake, just some of the typical spots in the summer range and some of the ridges that they're used to historically using to move around up here. From this recent data, which has only been in the last couple of years, these handful of collars, part of our fecal DNA work, these collars that you see up here are moving an average of 14 to 23 miles for migration. Some of that happens in a day. They can go really quick, just they're on the move, no need to wait. Again, not really following green up, but leaving food that's no longer nutritious for them, temperature, all of those things. And then the reverse, when they go back to summer range, they've kind of chasing that green, the new fresh forage that's available after winter and with spring rains. Limited stopovers, you'll hear more about stopovers in a little bit. That's kind of just where deer might hole up for a little bit before they complete their migration. You can see a little bit, this yellow one that was collared up here. We've got a little stopover activity here for whatever reason. And then again, a little bit right here before it finishes, this pretty much straight path down to winter range. So they do this for different reasons. Again, with the short migrations that happen here, there's not a lot of time for them to stop over and not necessarily a lot of reason up here. So this is just the same with a little bit of delineation for the summer range up there on the east, and then to the west, the blue is winter range. This red line is sort of my theory of why these deer no longer migrate to the full west areas that they used to, that our old herd plans showed. And I think that they're hitting this wall of resident deer, as I call them, where they just don't want to compete for resources. And the resident deer are really dense. They stay there all round, so year round, so they're constantly using up the resources that are there. And I don't think these migratory deer want to deal with that, so they just kind of stop. We talked a little bit about timing. It varies. It's not ever the same day, not even for an individual deer. I will say that these deer, all deer, are very site fidelic, site faithful, which means they use the same home ranges each year on summer and winter range. And for the most part, the collar data will show us that they will walk the same path both directions with very little variation. So they just are dialed into what they do. They go where they are familiar with things, and that's their behavior. So in the spring, we've had from this collar data, again, just a few collars here, but May 9th, some of them are still leaving in June to get up to the summer range. And then in the fall, again, they're staying up here till October, sometimes November. The latest that we've had one of these collars arrive back on winter range is December 10th. So that shows you that they can take up to a month if they want to, as opposed to going in a couple of days, but very short migrations compared to a lot of the other states in the West. And Stacy alluded to this. This is the BIOS information that is available to the public. It does not show, you know, we don't ever really post deer that are live collared for obvious reasons. But it's not a secret because this is just how they migrate. They're spread out throughout their herd, so they don't all go the same way. There's several different paths within each of these herds, and this just gives you a little bit of an idea of how they're moving, generally speaking, and you can look that up. I'll have a link for that later. The hunt stats, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because you can look it up. The success is generally pretty low, but this is an opportunity hunt zone, the D zones in general, and that's mostly based on hunter polls, asking you guys, and generally the answer is, we don't care if the success is low, we just want a public land to hunt. And so that's why there are so many tags. Will that change one day? Maybe. And you know, most of these deer that are harvested are just legal bucks, 2 points, very little 5 points or better bucks, but they do happen. Kind of fun to know that they're out there and that you might encounter one. These are a look at the spot kill maps, and you might just think, oh, this is crazy. What is this useful for? Because obviously each of these dots is covering a lot of ground physically on the map. But what it represents is general patterns. Some of that is just access related. Where can hunters actually go? You can kind of see this swath here that interacts with the foothills area where there's obviously some, a lot of this is private land. And then the interface with, as you reach the forest and public land, you can see, at least for D3, a lot of take along the boundary with the X zones. This is the crest of the Sierra. And this is, you know, almost 20 years apart. You can sort of see some of these same patterns. You can see a lot happening right here. And again, you can see this heavy part right here. Listed some of the active spots historically. These are in the deer write-ups that are on the website that you can look up as well, and then check them out on the map, see if there's something you're interested in. All right, and switching over to D4. Here we're looking at it on topo, and again, I'm gonna leave the mother lode alone on the west side and focus just on the Blue Canyon deer herd. This is primarily just Placer County for the Blue Canyon herd. And again, migratory black-tailed deer. There's occasionally some hybrid activity, but not much. The Lake Tahoe Basin is almost devoid of deer entirely, and so we don't get a lot of them up there. So the deer that are on the east side here in this zone are primarily just blacktails that have been working up high, but it's possible. 711 square miles in this zone, and we have borders with I-80, the Rubicon River, way in the west, A zone. 3 and 5, again, you don't really have to worry about those because your tag will let you go all through here. And then 7B, which you do need to worry about and make sure you're not over there hunting. So population, again, I pulled this from the 82 deer herd plan for Blue Canyon, 4,308, 259 deer harvested that year. Again, a look at this table with the whole zone estimations, including resident deer. And D4 a lot smaller, so that's why the numbers are so much lower. And again, still working on trying to get some of this data dialed in. I put the same elevations here. This is the same as D3 and a lot similar with D5. This is Tahoe National Forest. There's a little bit of El Dorado, more SPI land. We do have the Granite Chief Wilderness, so special rules over there if you're going to stay, and et cetera. And then we have the French Meadows Game Refuge, where there is no hunting allowed. In the real western edge, Auburn State Recreation Area is available for hunting in the Feather River Wildlife Area. 2 special hunts here, including the J17 either sex. And access, I-80 again, and that gets you onto the Tahoe National Forest in a variety of locations, Immigrant and Yuba Gap. very popular around the Lake Valley area. You can go up to Soda Springs and take Soda Springs Road down to French Meadows and Hellhole area. You can enter from the Tahoe side with the Pacific Crest Trail and the Granite Chief Wilderness. And then most people go in out of Auburn through Forest Hill and can work, in through there. So lots of areas, same type of thing with the maps. I'm throwing this up here, you'll be able to look at this in the recording, but this is how complicated the actual boundaries are for the refuges. I don't have a lot to say about the refuges. They're not CDFW owned. They're just Forest Service land that we said no hunting here. It's not managed any differently other than not being able to hunt it. So it's not a honey hole of deer necessarily, because the habitat is the same as everywhere else around it. And just make sure that you know where these boundaries are. If you're driving in on a road, a lot of the road points that intersect with the refuge are marked, but it's not all marked. And so be aware. You can print this out and kind of, I just use a highlighter on the map that I'm using and kind of trace it around so I know where to look. Similar species, again, like I mentioned before, this is where the deer are looking for to eat. We have had a little bit more fire activity in D4. The most recent in 2018 is the Norther Gap Fire at Yuba Gap. You can see this deer is actually was collared when that fire started, and I was expecting her to take off. She stayed just on the edge of the fire until it was out, and as deer commonly do because of their fidelity to the certain sites, they go what we call back in the black. As soon as the fire's out and it's not hot anymore, they're back in the area that they're comfortable with, that's their home range. And then it just depends whether they can make a living there or not. If it's too burn that first year, they'll just push out to the outskirts but stay pretty close. And then this is all going to regenerate into really good habitat for them. The typical Forest Service practices, which we can't manage what the Forest Service does, they have their own federal mandates to grow trees, basically. And these trees are not ideal for a lot of the species that we're talking about, the game species. But that's just what it is. So as far as the habitat goes, they're dealing with what they've got. You can see in the picture here of the American River Canyon, it's dense, it's thick. It's not great for deer, but after it burns, it's better. Same thing with predation and poaching here. Even if we had, if we could manipulate the habitat to a desired level, it's possible we could grow more animals, but the likelihood of that is it's not going to happen. And so I really think that the relationship with predators has become more of an issue now, in combination with the habitat not being available for them. So there's definitely, bears kill a lot of fawns, but bears also take over deer caches that lions, they have killed. And when they take over a lion kill, then the lion has to go hunt another adult deer. And so lions are our only specially protected species, but wolves are listed species, so they're not down to this area yet. And then with the bear activity, a ton of bears, despite the push to try and get bear hunting removed, there's a ton of bears. We just never work anywhere where we're not going to see bears. They're always on our trail cameras, and that interaction among the predators, I think, is starting to hit these D-zone deer a lot more than they used to, in combination with these other factors. Not a ton of animal vehicle collision with the D4 herd, just because they don't tend to cross I-80. We have a couple of underpasses on 80 now, and we're actually building a lower elevation one, Caltrans is, in the coming years. So they will have that opportunity. It's always good. It's good for genetic exchange. It's not typically what they do, because like we've talked about, these are east-west migrations. But we'll see if we can help them out by maintaining those paths if they want to use them. This is, again, what the migration corridors looked like from that early data. Here's the crest of the Sierra on the far east side, showing all of the summer range, and then moving down slope. There's Colfax here, the Rubicon River as the key winter ranges for these deer. And our crawler data basically backed that up. Here's the orange is that deer that I just showed you in the picture who basically stayed in the fire area. We have in this herd, we have the North Fork, Middle Fork of the American River here. Ridges again, that these deer are moving linearly along on the migration, and basically two different parts of this. North of the American River, the Forest Hill Divide, which is this basically this blue line. So we have deer moving above that, and then we have deer moving below the Forest Hill Divide, coming through Hellhole and French Meadows down here, and then down to the Rubicon River. These are on average, sorry, let me say 20 to 26 mile movements are what we've seen, what we're looking at right here. And it varies. Like this deer at EGAP did not move. That's where she was collared. She did not drop in elevation for winter range. So the conditions there were not, you know, the snow levels, the temperatures were not enough to drive her downslope. We'll be interested to see if that's the pattern for more of these deer. But then again, you've got these longer 26-mile movements where the deer are just not able to stay up here during the winter. A little bit again of stopover activity here on their way down to the final areas, but not a lot of information yet on those. So again, up here at the crest of the Sierra is the summer range. Down here is the blue range, my red line again, where, you know, historically, here's Colfax, where I showed you on that old deer herd management map. They used to show them coming all the way down to here. And again, I think this is just so full of resident deer, they don't want to mess with them. So they kind of stop. And based on the collars here on the screen, again, April 14th was one of the dates that they started leaving. They left as late as May. In the fall, October 8th, one of them took off November 11th. So stayed there for as long as possible. Didn't get pushed out by temperature or snow. Again, some of these will go in a day or two. Some of them are taking almost a month or so with their stops to get to where they're going to stay. So the statistics, again, that you can look up, 33,000 for the quota. The success rate is spread out for all these D zones. So it's not really articulated about how well you can do in each zone. It's kind of just assigned that success rate. 764 estimated bucks in the Blue Canyon herd of D4. And again, you'll see mostly 2 points, but there are those white whales, 24 5 points or better were harvested, and they're out there. So the spot kill maps, and again, just what I'm showing here is patterns. You see this big swath in the middle. It's the same in 2002 as it was in 2020. So right at that line, some of those are going to be private harvest and some of them are going to be public land, but that's a lot just showing you where access is. If you see, what you will see on here is some of these areas that just have no harvest, and that's either where, you know, access is just so limited that people can't get in there, but more than likely is just areas that don't hold deer. And there are those areas that just, you don't find them. They're very widely distributed on these ranges, but they're not, they're spread out, but they're not everywhere. So there are areas, if you're not seeing deer, then don't spend time there because they're not there. So real quick, I'm not going to run through these. Sean's going to post these links. They link to all kinds of different things that you can get information from. Make sure you're validating your deer. As far as bear goes, our region, North Central region and Rancho Cordova is doing bear appointments on Tuesdays this year. So to get bears validated, and then also if you had a deer, you can bring that in. You got to call and make an appointment. And then you're just looking for those other places that can validate for you. And tips, it's hard. I know you guys were promised secrets. That's what Sean used to lure you in. There's not a lot of secrets. It's luck. You got to be lucky. You got to hunt when it rains. My best tip, if you have the option of not, you know, if it's a work issue, don't just say, oh, I'm taking off the first week, opening week. If you have any flexibility, wait until you get weather, cloud cover, lower temperatures, rain, and go out then. They're just moving around more. They're out more. I also recommend looking for sign and focusing on smaller areas. These deer have very small home ranges, like some of the collar data shows 1.5 miles, 2 miles square. So if you're seeing buck sign and you're not seeing a buck, just know that they're in an area that may be as small as 2 square miles. So look for the game trails, look for bedding areas. Where's the water? They're going to water twice a day. Where's the forage? Where's the cover? And just kind of work that area instead of I mean, you can easily be chasing your tail if you're saying, oh, I didn't see anything opening weekend right here, I'm going to go somewhere else. They're in that area if you're seeing sign. Drive slow. I don't know. There's always a mix of hunters. You know, some of you guys can't hike in where there's nobody. Some of you take roads and park somewhere and then walk in from there. But drive slow. When we're darting, see a lot of deer just off the road that most people don't see if they're just focused on getting somewhere. Be aware of a lot of other recreation in these areas. It's typically still warm enough for people to be out, people who are not hunters. So just know that you'll run into that. Bring a bear tag. Again, I mentioned bears everywhere. There's some grouse around Jackson Meadows and D3. There's again, at the higher elevations, grouse, quail. A lot of the forest has quail. We've seen a lot this year, so it seems to be a good year for quail. Lake Valley at Yuba Gap is a popular area for quail, easy to get to, just up 80. And reasonable expectation, you know, if you're just hunting for meat, take the first legal buck. It's just, don't wait, because it's hard to find these animals. They're not plentiful. There's a lot of people out there hunting them, and you just don't want to tell yourself, oh, I'm going to wait, you know, for that big one, because you might not get it. So if you're just looking for putting something in the freezer, do it early. And I'll just mention also that I have a Cwd Check Station at the U.S. Forest Service in Truckee on October 1st and 2nd, which is the second weekend of general, and then also the opening of the X zones. You can validate your deer there anyway, but also we're trying to collect these samples, very important to monitor for the health of the herds. And I'm going to hand it over to Shelly. I hope I didn't take too long.
No, great job. You gave them the truth, and that's what we're looking for.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having trouble with getting my PowerPoint up.
All right, there's some really good questions being posted in the question and answer function. And what I'm going to actually do is maybe let our panelists address some of them if they want to the crowd, so our YouTube viewers can see them. So if you see any good questions in there, Stacy or Sarah, that should be addressed to the YouTube audience, please keep note of those, and we'll go ahead and address them. But go ahead, Shelly, whenever you're ready.
Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. I'm really hoping I don't repeat a lot of what was already said, because these herds are very similar. So I'll do my best to kind of scream through this, but I'm really going to focus on one of the herds that I've had a collaring study on. So with that, just want to reiterate that all of the resources are online. There's a lot of great stuff that you can access online. I know everybody wants to talk to a biologist to find out where the deer are, but if you do a little bit of your own research, you can have a great start. So just wanted to reiterate the hunting season, and also mention on the D5 zone, there is a J18 apprentice either sex deer hunt. So that happens the same as the general season. So that's a special hunt there. So I'm going to cover the D5, and it's pretty large, and there's a few areas that I don't manage, so I don't know a whole lot about them, but I did ask some of my colleagues that do, and got some information for you guys. But so there's a lot of public land access. There's the El Dorado National Forest, the Stanislaus National Forest. There's some BLM in the lower elevations that are huntable. Making sure of the wilderness areas, there's Desolation, McCallamy, and Carson Iceberg in this area. So make sure that if you're going to be hunting there and camping, that you get your proper wilderness permits. Huge private land. Sierra Pacific Industry owns a lot of the D5 area. And just wanted to note too that there is a state game refuge in Amador County. So the total D5 acreage is about 3 million acres, and it's 30% public lands and 69% private lands. And the Sierra Pacific Industries owns about 7% of that. So over here in the pink is the Sierra Pacific Industry lands throughout the forest. And as you heard earlier, they have closed their lands for the 2022 season. So one of the things that recently impacted the D zone is the Caldor fire. But I really wanted to encourage everybody that it wasn't completely terrible. You know, there's a huge benefits to fire for deer populations. It promotes diverse plant communities and improves food sources. There's more shrub, as my other colleagues have already talked about, and it really opens the forest floor for longer range of viewing. So, you know, people hunting in burned areas tend to be pretty successful. And this is the fire severity map from that fire. And you can see in the dark red, that's more of the Grizzly Flat area. But you could, throughout the whole fire, there's not a whole lot of areas that you have this intense fire happening. In these intense areas, it does scorch the soil so that the brush and grasses don't grow back as quickly. But when you have this patchwork happening, it's immediately coming back. And I've already been up in some of these areas and have seen some great brush growing, and the deer are going to absolutely love this. So in the D5 deer, we have the migratory blacktail, occasional mule deer hybrid, and they migrate from 14 to 40 miles. And then also we have the resident blacktail deer in this D5 zone. So the first herd of the zone is the lower portion of which extends into D3 and D4 as well. It's called the Mother Lode herd. It's largely private lands on the western foothill slopes of the Sierras, and they pretty much occupy the same range year round. There's absolutely no migration. People think that all deer migrate. That's not true. Their home range is about a half a mile. And I noticed in the questions and answers, somebody asked this question about the difference between the resident versus migratory. So their behavior is greatly affected by human activity, and most of their threats is habituation, because there's a lot of neighborhoods that feed the deer illegally. So they're you know, congregating deer, and they get hit a lot by cars in neighborhoods and streets along residential areas. And then domestic dogs also are a problem for these animals. The second deer herd in the D5 zone is the Grizzly Flat herd, and this probably is the herd that was most affected by the Caldor fire. It's on the south half of El Dorado County, so it's in the southern portion of Highway 50. And hold on a second. And their summer range elevation is 7,500 feet. Fall migration end of September and first week of November. They arrive on the winter range about October 15th to November 10th. And the winter range elevation is between 3,000 and 4,500 feet. You can access this range by Mormon Immigrant Trail, any roads coming off of south of Highway 50, and then Highway 16 also out towards Somerset. I think that the greatest threat to this particular herd is the increase in vineyards and wineries in their wintering range. They're coming down and they're hitting lots of fences now because there's huge vineyards that are that have been developed in the last few years, and also just more houses and a lot of timber harvest happening in these areas. The next herds is the Salt Flat and Railroad Flat deer herds, and this is Amador County. Has the Salt Springs herd, which is south of 88. And the solid dots here shows some of the migratory patterns of these deer. We have a collaring study on Highway 88 and Highway 4 to find out where these animals are crossing these highways, so that we can better inform Caltrans to put more under crossings, because these highways seem to be their biggest problem as far as, you know, road kills. So this is recent collaring data from that project. The ones on the bottom here are from the Railroad Flat herd and Highway 4. So you can kind of get a general idea of how they're migrating through these areas. And again, I don't know a whole lot about this particular herd. If you have more questions and want to ask more answers, or need more answers to those herds, then I can get you in contact with those biologists to give you more information. And just mentioning once again that there is a Salt Springs Game Refuge, and Sarah kind of explained what those are about. There's no hunting allowed in those areas, so just make sure you know where you are. But this is my most favorite deer herd, the Pacific deer herd. They have a summer range up in the Crystal Basin area off of Ice House Road. And so this blue is their summer range. The fawning areas are the orange. This critical summer range is pink. And then you have critical winter range is the green, and the critical or the winter range is the purple here. So I'm going to show you some more maps about where they kind of land throughout the year. So this Pacific deer herd is on the western slope of the Sierras. Again, their elevations are similar to the other deer herds that I spoke about. Their migration is averaged to about 20 miles. So this pink area or red area right here is the King Fire scar. So you can see that the King Fire burned the majority of their intermediate range. And then we have this OHV area on their winter range that's closed to hunting during certain times of the year to protect that critical winter range there. So the significant fire that happened in my area was the King Fire. It was happened in September and October of 2014. And it burned about almost 98,000 acres throughout much of their intermediate range. And previously to that, this population was last studied with telemetry in 1990, and there was only 17 deer that were collared with VHF collars. And as was mentioned before, we have such great technology now with these GPS collars, we can really discover movements. And part of my study was to really find out how they're moving across the landscape. So when the deer started migrating, we were getting 1 point an hour. So we really could get a good understanding of where they were going. So I did a survival collaring study from 2015 to 2020. We collared 45 female deer. It was very difficult to collar these animals. For some reason on this herd, they are very skittish. I was under the impression that we would get 40 collars on in 1 year, and it took us 5 years to get 45 collars on. And the other issue we had was they kept dying. So yeah, it's just a really interesting herd. They're really difficult to dart, and so I think that's a challenge when you're hunting as well, because they're just really skittish. So the study area mainly was in the Crystal Basin recreational area. It's about 85,000 acres. And it has 25 developed campgrounds and over 700 campsites and about 3,000 kilometers of paved and dirt roads. So it is really heavily used. And I'm sure if any of you have hunted this area, that you know how saturated it can get with deer hunters during the season. So just be careful when you're hunting out there. So one of the interesting things that we discovered is just our mortalities for this herd. We found that there were 9 mortalities where we confirmed mountain lion. However, it was mentioned before as well that the bears were coming in and scavenging the mountain lion kills. And so we have a lot of concerns about that dilemma, because then the mountain lions have to go and kill another deer. So that's really causing a huge impact on these herds. Unfortunately, we had 4 deer poached, which indicates to me that poaching is a huge issue in this area. These animals that were found had 22 bullets in them. And so, yeah, it was really discouraging to find these animals that were poached after we had spent so much time collaring them. I had about 3 deer die of adenovirus, which was the first time that we'd confirmed adenovirus in the migratory herds. It wasn't surprising to us because they do mingle with resident deer on the winter range. So if they become immune compromised, they're probably more apt to become deceased from the adenovirus. Adult deer can survive it, but those young ones usually they succumb to the adenovirus. I also have that junior hunt, and so 2 of my does were legally harvested, which was great for those kids, but because of all the work that went into collaring these deer, it was a little discouraging. And then I had a couple die of capture myopathy, which just means stress from capture. So again, this was a huge mortality for this herd, we figured that their survival rate was about 62% for the herd, and an average herd for California is about 86%. So, and this is the most studied Western slope deer herd so far. So we're kind of thinking that this is going to be the case for all of these Western slope deer. So there's a full suite of predators, and I just want to point out this picture. I really like this picture because it really is telling what's going on the landscape. So we have car tires, we have people footprints, we have bear prints here. There's mountain lion prints here, and then deer prints all in one road. So these poor deer, yeah, have a lot against them for survival, but they are definitely adapting because, like I said, they're pretty skittish, and I'll show some more about their behaviors in just a second. So the migratory behavior. This is a map again of, so we have the Crystal Basin area here where there's summer ranges, and then they're usually going down into the winter rain and into Georgetown, Quintet, Swansboro area. There was some in Garden Valley. So they, and again, this is the King Fire. So these are just general lines. Each line is a separate deer, which kind of shows you their migration patterns, like where they would typically go, dependent on where we captured them. So this area right here is Union Valley Reservoir. This right here is Loon Lake. So that kind of gives you an idea of where they're going. We do think that the Peavine Ridge deer are typically mostly just moving up and down the slope of that ridge. They're not really migrating down the hill, because we had a few deer collared there, and they didn't migrate, but they also didn't last long in our study because those were the deer that were getting poached. So the onset and duration of migration was completely varied from year to year. These collars were set to be on for 5 years so we could monitor if their migrations were consistent. And we found some absolutely amazing things. There's old wives' tales about how deer always leave on October 15th, and that's just not true. Every year they leave at a different time. Some deer take off and make their migration in one day. And what we found is what's really interesting is the use of stopovers, and I'll get into that in just a second. So the autumn migration began about October 24th, but that's plus or minus 13, 14 days. Spring migration began in about April 30th, and that took about plus or minus 30 days. The mean duration of migration, so in the autumn, it took them about 32 days to complete their migration on average. Like I said, there are some deer that just book it in one day and they can make it to their range within that day, but this is just the average. And the spring was 16.35 days. And we think that the spring is less because these does are gonna have fawns and they need to book it to their fawning area before they have those fawns. So now I'm going to get into stopovers a little bit. So migratory species use stopovers. We know this. It's well documented in long distance migrations. You know, you've probably heard about the Wyoming migrations that are, you know, hundreds of miles. And so they're usually used to replenish energy and for rest. And these stopovers are slower. That you know that it's a stopover because it's slower and less directional movement. So what we found in the Pacific deer herd is about 25 of the 45 collared were using stopovers. And then they were using the stopovers more in the autumn than the spring. And again, I think that's more because of the fawning that's happening on that spring migration. So here is the intermediate area, picture of the intermediate area, and you can see this is part of the King Fire that happened. So it looks pretty barren and desolate, but these deer loved to be in this area. This is a one deer migration, and as you can see, there's just these straight lines, and then it would congregate in one area for quite a long time. They get a bunch of points there, and then it would start to move again and then congregate again. So we put this in a model, and this is the Brown and Bridge model, movement model, and you can see these white areas are where those stopovers are occurring, and the bigger the white area, the longer the stopover is. I didn't mean to do that. Hold on just a second. So you can see that a lot of them are using these stopovers in this intermediate zone, which helps us understand how to manage these deer a little differently, because in the past we were thinking that we needed to, just manage their summer ranges and their winter ranges, and that they didn't really utilize this intermediate area. So we're rethinking that. The other really interesting thing, when you compare the mortalities and migration, the mortalities on the seasonal range, I had about 9, and during migration, there was about 8. But there was absolutely no mortalities on the stopovers. And some of the deer would stop over for more than 120 days. So we're kind of trying to figure out and tease out what this behavior is about, if it has to do with predator avoidance. I think Sarah mentioned, when they're mingling with those resident deer, they're competing for resources. There's a lot more people in those residential areas that have dogs. So they might be changing their behaviors a little bit. So we know the benefits is the locations of high conservational importance. They, escape of crowded winter range, like I mentioned. There could be less predation risk, may increase fitness. This was on, these were game camera pictures, and you can see these does in the winter, their body condition is just really, really good. So they're getting good nutrients in these stopover areas. The other thing I want to mention in these photos is you can see this dominant doe kind of fighting off these other does on these areas. So they're competing for the food, and the dominant does typically probably get the best food. So during mild winters, this could be a substitute for seasonal range. So just some D5 zone tips. Deer begin the migration when vegetation begins freezing in higher elevations. I think Stacy mentioned that too, that when it starts freezing at night and the forage isn't available, they start moving. Also hunt when there are storms. Deer move around more. Don't disregard these intermediate ranges. We had some deer leave summer range, go all the way to winter range, come back to summer range again. And so these exploratory movements were kind of shocking to us, because it takes a lot of energy for a deer to go back and forth like that. The other cool thing I'll mention is that we had a deer swim Union Valley. Actually, a couple of them were swimming the lake. And I think that was a historical migratory path that they continued to do, because where they were swimming across the lake didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So that's another interesting thing that we learned about those deer. I just want to say one quick thing, that the California Deer Association supported the collaring study for the Pacific deer herd. So I just want to encourage you hunters to definitely contribute to Mule Deer Foundation and California Deer Association. Those organizations do help us do this type of research and support this type of thing. So shout out to them and encourage contribution to that. And I'll say it again, because all of us have said it, that you need to get a bear tag. I guarantee you, if you're going hunting, you're going to see a bear. I have some mountain quail cameras out right now, and there is not a camera that I haven't seen 4 or 5 bears on. So there's lots of bears out there. So please do your part and get a bear tag. And then my chronic wasting disease validation check stations, I'm going to have one on Highway 50 and Ice House Road on opening weekend from 10 to 6. And there's also going to be one on Highway 4 located at the long pullout on westbound side of the highway, adjacent to the fire station. And then that check station will be D5 opening weekend on Sunday, and then Saturday, October 29th. And I may have another one off Highway 50 at the end of the season as well, because what we find is typically more hunters are successful later in the season. We always do check stations opening weekend when it's 105 degrees and people aren't bringing deer down the hill. So we're trying to get more check stations so that you guys can do your part and get your heads sampled for chronic wasting disease. And with that, I think I'm done.
All right, thank you, Shelley.
Yeah.
All right, so I was looking over the questions, and one of the prevalent ones that came up was like, why are there so many tags available? And California's hunt plan is not based on success, it's based on opportunity. If would you ladies agree? Would you actually come up and help out answer these questions? You all disappeared on me, but
Yes, I agree, Sean. We've polled the hunters and we'll continue to do so. I don't know when the next one is scheduled, but basically asking, and the majority has always said success would be nice, but we just want a place to go hunt. And so that's what the D zones are about, and unlikely to change unless the majority of hunters decide, nope, we don't want to do that anymore.
yeah. So a lot of, people compare to other states where maybe they have more success hunting, but you'll also see that it's not exactly easier to get a tag in those areas. So they limit tags during those high density, high success hunts, and that's the same thing we do here in California. So you can get a high success hunt, but there's very limited tags available for that. So some of the special hunts, that if you saw a G, that's a general hunt. It's a special hunt. Usually it's during a rutting period or some type of migration period where you're more likely to have success encounters. But our general deer tags, our D, C's, and B's, and A's, and X's are just opportunity available, right? So that was good. Any other questions that you would like to maybe share with the crowd here? That Sarah, did you see one that you answered that everybody should know?
Oh, it was a whirlwind. I don't know.
Okay, Shelley or Stacy, was there any really good ones that you thought the whole audience should know? No, there was a lot. I'm looking at 48 questions that were answered by our panel. There's still 3 that are open. I don't know. Let's see. Everybody's saying thank you. I'm going to echo somebody else's comments. I'm very proud of what you ladies have been doing. To see your work. Thank you for sharing it tonight with this crowd. They really enjoyed it. So it's cool to see that there are actually people, hands, feet on the ground, going out there and doing it. And I think you ladies are doing a good job. So thank you for that. Let me see. A couple of questions about the mountain lions. That is not under our control. That was a proposition that went through back in, I think, 89 or somewhere back then, that it's prohibited. You can't even possess mountain lion parts in California. So sorry about that. Our department does not control that. And that's about it. Somebody asked how many hunters are on this meeting tonight. I saw up to 142. I wasn't really looking the whole time, but we had more than half of people registered. And I'm sure some of them dropped off knowing they can watch this again later on YouTube. But let me go ahead and share my screen so we can close this out and everybody can get to dinner, because it will be a long recording otherwise. And so the last couple of things that I want to mention. Are you seeing a few more things? Yes, okay. Yep. So chronic wasting disease, very important. We don't want it in California, so please follow all the regulations, requirements when you're importing deer, elk, or moose from out of state. Okay, very important. Don't try to get away with it. Don't try to sneak it in. It's one of those diseases that once it's in the soil and it's prevalent in an area, it doesn't dissipate, it just doesn't just go away. It's not like something where it can come and go. It's here, it'll stay, it'll just get worse. Volunteer to get your California animal tested. The ladies shared some of their testing dates and locations. There's a QR code here. Take a picture of it, snap it, whatever you need to do to look up this. This is a CWD site. We did a chronic wasting disease webinar last year. View that so you can understand what it is and how important it is. And just help us out by getting more animals tested in the near future here. The next webinar will be on September 8th. We're going to talk about choosing the right rifle ammunition. Using the new copper bullets, as I mentioned earlier, might not function correctly in your firearm, that maybe it had sporterized or something to it. But for most part, most of the ammo should work. But if you're getting significant changes in where you're shooting on those things, your rifle might not be right for the ammunition that you're purchasing. So we'll talk about that. And then I will try to have a bear webinar maybe 2 weeks after that. So please stand by. That QR code will go to all of what I have to offer at this time. There's some in-person clinics that are scheduled for next month. And that's all I want to do is tell you thank you for joining us tonight. You hung in there with a longer webinar, but this was very good topic, very good materials. Good luck with your dove hunts. Was successful. Maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but I was successful with my deer and my dove draw. I will be hunting hopefully Lost Mass Wildlife Area for the dove opener. And if I see you out there, wish me luck and I'll wish you luck. But enjoy the upcoming hunting season. It's coming upon us. And thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, ladies. I owe you what is it called? What burger do I owe you?
A Walker burger.
A Walker burger and a shake. All right. So I had to bribe them, but no, they did a good job. Everybody came on once I offered the milkshake. They said, okay, I'm in. All right, well, that's it. Thank you. Good night and catch us in the future. Have a good one.